Well, hello again. This is the Dick and Mike Show, and I got Dick back from his special assignment, so he's here tonight. And as we were just talking earlier, it's a little bit of a political show here tonight, and we're going to self-indulge ourselves and talk about our feelings and what we believe and what's going on. And Dick's the real politician here.
Oh, no. That's,
So
don't start out by calling me names.
well, I'm going to call you a name. You're a politician,
Oh,
so
my
I
God.
can make that bad. So.
It's a passion, but I'm not.
Anyway, Dick, if you'd like to start off with what you've got to start us off with, and then
Yeah.
I'll jump in when I feel comfortable.
Well, just in the last few days, I mean, we're getting in the election season, which, God, is so long anyway, which probably needs some legislation to make it 6 months or something like that. We could cure that. But everybody's starting to talk about those things. We've got our first caucus or vote coming up. And I was just thinking about this whole process that comes up every 4 years. And I was reflecting 8 years ago when our current president made a statement that he was going to fundamentally transform the country. So here today, people want to fundamentally transform it back. I mean, that's a lot of the argument from Obamacare to lots of other things. I mean,
Right.
we've got one side that says he saved the country financially, and the other side says, how can you save it with $18 trillion in debt? It's funny money. We're living in a false economy. So all this is going to come to play. But it brought back a question that I always think about every election period. Somebody comes in as a candidate with a passion that I'm going to save the country, I'm going to inject these values, I'm going to do this. And I go back to the idea that I don't want somebody to uproot in my life every 4 years just because he or she has a passion for it. I go back to an old philosophy that I had, and it can be abrasive and somewhat condemning. But I've thought that a lot of the great political work in this country is done almost at the local level, but also because it's structured. If you're in a township or a city, your millage is divided by law, 2/10 go to here and 1.4 go to there, that type of thing. But when you get people that have free reign, like our senators and our president, it gets quite chaotic. The idea that it needs fundamentally transforming every 4 years. I don't want anybody to have that much power. And I get a little turned off about somebody that thinks that's okay. When you look at the founding fathers and read the Federalist Papers, and this nails me as a conservative, I guess, they were the guys that were founding the country. And yet they had what I call a healthy disdain for power. They also acknowledged human nature. The Bill of Rights was all about human nature. If you don't do this, somebody's going to come along and do this. So we're going to stop it right now. So when you think about how many times we've heard things like, a country as rich as ours can certainly afford to take care of the less fortunate, the losers in life's lottery, that type of thing. We're not rich. $18 trillion in debt is not rich. And yet we've got people still running on that same premise.
Yeah.
We've got a businessman. We're a capitalistic system. We've got a businessman who you'd think, pretty good reference, pretty good resume, knows how things work, and succeeded in it. We've got a socialist Democrat who is going to continue to hand things out, taking it from business. We've evolved in a country that seems to hate corporate America. And yet every tax dollar that we have comes from somebody's profits, either individually.
Yep.
We assume that if you made $60,000 last year and you needed 48, there's at least 12 we can get a piece of. If a corporation made X number of dollars in profit, we assume it's rightfully just that, so we're funding ourselves and all these wonderful, warm-hearted programs off of this ugly profit thing. And so we've got people this election that I've watched, it's never more prevalent that we're at two different philosophies. We've kind of eked in over the years with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But we're at a point now where either one philosophy is going to save us or we're going to continue down the same road. And I'm real concerned. I look at historically what's happened with some very fine people in this country, from Ross Perot to Mitt Romney to just decent folks who, we always find out after the fact, he wasn't so bad after all. Did you know Mitt Romney's a very charitable guy and he's well thought of and here are these wonderful things he did. But you get in the political cycle and it all runs amok. And it goes back to a kind of a theory that I've had, and it's just mine, and it's maybe popcorn psychology, but, nature abhors a vacuum. Something's going to fill it.
Yeah.
So in our country or in the world, if you like applause, you become an entertainer. If you like laughter, you become a comedian. If you like physical confrontation, you become a professional athlete or a boxer. I think there's a certain personality that is attracted to the artificial pomp and circumstance and power and stuff of high-level politics. Not talking about the township official that works free and is really a guardian of his community and basically fulfills the structure of it as it's laid out. But when you look at the idea, as Ross Perot said, people running a popularity contest at the national level, and some people that have no credentials in it. I marveled at the night that, it was either when he got the nomination or got elected, I think it was Charlie Rose spoke about Obama and said, you know, this is really fascinating. Here's a guy we really don't know much about. And I sat there thinking, you've been campaigning for 2 years. Where have you been? You know, what have you done?
Yeah.
And so I look at this idea of a certain psychology, and the problem is, Mike, if you look at the other professions that we have, if we have someone who has a propensity to abuse drugs and alcohol, you can't be a registered nurse or a doctor. If you're a pedophile, you're certainly not going to become a kindergarten teacher. If we find out you're a bully and that type of thing, we'd rather you not be a policeman or that type of thing. But then you look at the presidency and the Senate, and I think anybody that wants it that bad, that will promise everything and run around to everybody and take money from anybody just to get forward, there's almost a problem with that psychology. That almost ought to be a disqualifier. And you look at the people that we have now, it's just a repetition of the same thing. It's just the same thing over and over again. I think politicians, like athletes, a football player wants to win the Super Bowl. An actor wants to get an Academy Award. I think there's a certain small percentage of the population whose psychology is, I want to go as far as I can in politics. I want to get my name on the registry that I was the 43rd president. I want to be a senator and have a building named after me in my hometown. I just think we ought to look at those people and say, wait a minute here, that's not the kind, almost not the kind we want being in charge of our lives. If
Well,
that's just my,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, we've had these conversations
Yeah.
for a long time now, you and I. And I think we both agree that today, and maybe I'm just new at this, but politicians today, it's a job.
oh,
It's a job. I'm gonna pick this type of job, Democrats, I'm gonna pick this type of job, I'm gonna be Republican. And like you said, they sell themselves, and they get elected or hired by the people of the United States to do their job. And it's one of the most lucrative positions in the world, one of the most powerful positions in the world.
Yep.
And once they get in, we can't get them out. We can't just fire them.
yeah.
And so many presidents, I think, at certain points during their tenure, could get fired, would get fired.
Oh, yeah.
But you can't do that today. So we, especially our age, we take it real serious. I mean, the vote is one of the most powerful tools that I have just to make my statement in America about what I think. It's one little vote, takes me about half an hour to do, and I'm done.
Right.
But young kids today, and I talk about that with my nieces and nephews and the politics, and they're so, we talked earlier, local in their concept and historic in their concept.
Right.
They're not world global today because we're a global stage whether we like it or not. And they're not, I don't want to call it universal thinking. They're just, it's caught up in idealism
Right.
about what it should be like and not be like, back and forth, same as you and I.
It's not fair. This
Yeah,
isn't fair. And
it's
this
not
guy's
fair.
gonna make it fair, so I'll vote for him, yeah.
But the same thing, when you look at, I look at it from, we talked earlier about, I lived in Australia for over 25 years. And it was a socialist country. It's slowly getting out of that.
There's a lesson there.
And, and what brought it to my attention, what made me wake up about socialism, was when my oldest son, graduated from high school. Immediately the following week, he went on unemployment
From high school.
from high school.
Wow.
Didn't even have a job, never got a job, but because he was not a student any longer, the government supported him because now he's in the workforce, or could be. And I asked him, when's he gonna get a job? He said, I don't have to get a job because I'm on unemployment. And as long as I meet their criteria, I'll stay on unemployment as long as I choose to. And he did for a long time, and I got mad.
Now, what's the criteria? He has to make him think he's looking for a job, but
He
can't
had
find one?
to,
Or?
he had to submit 3 documents that he'd actually made applications to jobs and didn't get hired. And they would keep him on unemployment. And that was like every 2 weeks or once a month or something like that. He had to submit those forms to the organization that paid
Right.
him, the government organization. And all he did, because I watched him do it, would go through the newspaper, find 3 companies, call them up, and say, I need a job, will you give me a job? And they'd say, no, right now, and he'd write down, he called them, this time he called them, this is who he talked to, and he didn't have a job. And he said he stayed on unemployment for a long, almost a year, maybe
Wow.
2 years. And that, to me, was the beginning of understanding what socialism really is. And although I knew of the word,
Right.
I never really focused on what it meant.
Right.
And then I wondered how easy it is to buy votes from a party, one party or another. And you go on social welfare, unemployment benefits, you go on all the freebies.
Not a bad gig.
Who's going to vote for a party that may take that away from me? I'm not going to vote for them.
Right.
I get all this money every week or every month. Why would I vote to jeopardize that? So the party that has that system is well ahead of the game.
And it becomes a part of their modus operandi.
Yeah.
There's a certain party in this country that, when elections come up, we keep hearing that the other party's going to do away with Social Security and Medicare.
Yep.
Nobody's going to do away with that.
No.
And when they say end Medicare as we know it, well, technically, if you make any change, even if it's productive, that is ending it as we know it. But it becomes a way that they operate. And when you talked about politics as a profession, I used to joke that we started to run into trouble when we put a certain curriculum in college, political science.
Right.
It's teaching
Yep.
the manipulation and I'll look at a young person, very bright young person. You see him on Jeopardy. You talk to him in a school. What do you want to do? Well, I want to go into politics. Why you don't want to employ 80 people, provide a good or a service? But again, attracted to that. It seems like a pretty nice gig.
Well, the younger people that I've talked to years ago, and they talked about going into politics.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, what is your agenda? What do you want to do? What is your goal for wanting to become? What is your plan? I just want a job. I want a job that's going to pay me a lot of money for a long time, and all I got to do is keep it.
And you meet a lot of interesting people. And when I drew the analogy earlier, I guess the contrast between the person that wants to be a professional athlete or the comedian or whatever, unlike them who have to be self-supporting, they have to convince people to buy tickets to their show or their game or whatever.
Yep.
We actually provide resources, a facility, infrastructure, pay, benefits, staff for these other people. They don't have to be self-sustaining. It's a great gig.
And how are we going to address it with the younger people? Because they're our future.
Right.
And how do we get the young people, and I'm talking the 18-year-old voter,
Right.
up to 25, 26, to get involved with understanding why they're voting
Right.
and the power they have in the vote, and the thinking about voting on a global scale, but still keeping it where
Right.
we need to control and get our country back strong again.
Right.
So we need to localize as far as nation building. We need to localize that vote, but at the same time, we got to deal with the rest of the world because they're out there
Well,
and they're not going away.
And when we were growing up, it was whether it was energy or consumption or whatever, there was the old idea that the world can't take 2 United States, with the way we live and what we do. And yet, a very strong United States was not bad for the world. We were the most generous people on the planet for decades. We helped a lot of other people. From our strong position, we defended Europe and stopped the march of Japan in the Pacific Rim. The idea of us being strong and superior is not automatically in contrast to the welfare of the rest of the world. But young people, a lot of them, you hear that. It's almost as if they're happy with the demise. It's almost as if they're happy with the fact that we're championing every other culture. We're so interested in everybody else's culture. We have a unique culture of our own that we specifically designed at the time in contrast to the rest of the world. The rest of the world was living under kings and dukes and czars and that type of thing. In 1775 or 1776, if you look, the world was kind of a sewer, and in some places it still is. But in less than 240 years, in fact, it'll be 240 years this July, we've been steadily climbing out of the sewer that existed. It wasn't a wonderful world, and we came along and created an evil existence. It was quite the other way around. But that's not understood, and that's not taught a lot of places. You've got people today that are campaigning on that very premise, that the United States needs to tone down. Our current president, one of the first things he did was go out to the world community and apologize for how arrogant we've been at times. It infuriated a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's the psychology of that generation or that period that we were so inherently evil, we walked over everybody to get where we're at. Well, historically, that's not even true.
No.
And yet, politically, you've got people that are going to go on that premise today, that we've got to continue to tone down. We've got to continue to back up. We've got to continue to take an equality place in the world instead of leadership. You know, Donald Trump talks about restoring America's greatness again. That almost offends a lot of people who automatically go to slavery and women couldn't vote, things that were 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And again, part of that world we were continually climbing out of. They're automatically offended by it. But the truth is, a strong America did some very wonderful things in this world over the last 150 years.
Well, you know, we did, and how do we bring that back?
Right.
But the other thing is, when we talked about our society and our living standards and what we do compared to other countries, and how do we keep that, what we've got, and improve on that. And I guess I was very fortunate as a young man working worldwide instead of working in the U.S. And I've lived in these countries, Indonesia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt, Brunei.
Wow.
I've lived in, and more than that, I've lived in those countries.
Sure.
And the young people today haven't got a clue what we've got. When you live in those countries and you see the caste system,
Yeah.
and the class system,
Yep.
and it's not as, I mean, it's been a while since I've been overseas now, but it's still there, because I have friends there. It's not as bad, but in some places it's worse.
Right.
The young people today don't understand what they've got. And then I get really upset when you see the people standing on the flag and burning the flag, and I mean, that's a whole nother story.
Right.
I'd hate to be around when
But
that
it's
happened, because
the epitome of ignorance.
I would be arrested probably
Yeah, I've been there.
if I was around there. But what we have today is wonderful, but yet you keep getting beat down by the young people that don't really know. They're idealists for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we, as people our age and even some a little bit younger, convey that message that you need to pay attention, you need to learn? And you were talking about these guys that go around the street and ask questions
Right.
of the young people.
Right.
Where does this live, and where does that, and who did this and who did that, and name me one president, whatever. None of them ever get it right.
These are graduates of high school. Some are college
Yeah,
students.
and so college students, they don't get it right. They don't have any idea what the answers are to these questions. They should know better than us.
Right.
I mean, I'm old enough to forget that stuff.
And you know,
So-
one of the things that I see has happened, and again, it comes up in every election, because somebody's going to come out and say, here's who I am, this is my persona, this is what I believe in, and I think that's what you like, so you'll vote for me. But inherent in that is that people are taking what they believe in and how they'll operate from the public arena, the government. It used to be the other way around. When people talked about censorship, and people talk about censorship today, the thought police, what they don't recall was it wasn't the government. Maxwell House Coffee sponsored programs on TV. Texaco, they were the censors.
Yeah.
They said, we believe that there are certain moral standards and things out there in the community that these people are not going to be happy about if you put it on the program, so we're not going to attach our corporate name to it. So they believed that people out there in the consuming world had identities, had belief systems, and the government and everybody else better respect those, or it's not going to go well. Now it's turned around the other way, and my greatest fear is that young people are sort of looking to the east, if you will, Washington DC or whatever, and from there they're getting their belief systems and what they'll put up with and what they'll contend with and what they believe is right and wrong. And it can be done by a lot of very slick people who use like fairness and equity and other things. And we don't blink and say, yeah, but maybe it's inherently wrong. The right to privacy, all right, was the foundation, if you will, for the decision in Roe versus Wade.
Yep.
All right? And yet, when you ask people if we found a living cell on a foreign planet or something that would be a miraculous discovery, we'd have life. And yet, in our own government, that little living cell that's been fertilized and starts to grow in a mother's womb is not considered a life and doesn't have your right. These are inconsistent. You know, who are we as a country? What do we believe in? One or the other.
Yeah.
None of them are life or all of them are life. One is an interesting find and the other one, but my concern is that it's gotten so sophisticated among politicians, as Ross Perot said, not quoting him, but again, the two very powerful statements he made to me when I met him and talked to him for a brief period of time in a parking lot, keep ringing back. And when he talked about the idea that the political class wants it to be a popularity contest, that's the way they want it.
Yeah.
And then there's those thinkers that we call the undecided, the independents. We got to give enough of those on our side to pull over. But when he talked about the marketing of candidates, you know, the same people that bring us cornflakes bring us candidates. This concerns me because it can be very sophisticated. When you've got people that have degrees in marketing and advertising and psychology, we can have a movement. We can take a candidate forward with those things. And in our sophisticated delivery, we can move mountains. We can move people. And my real concern is that people are going to start to get their values from the government and say that's okay, rather than the other way around.
And it's happening.
Yeah.
Before we go too much further, I'd
Yeah.
like to invite any young person out there who has an issue with what we're talking about
That'd be a great
to
conversation.
come on the show. Call us up, check the internet, check the website, call us up, come on the show, email us. We'd love to have you
Right.
and have you explain why we're inconsistent or we're wrong and your new thoughts are correct. Please do that. Then I want to get to, I interrupted you,
No,
so
that's fine.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in the extreme of this, when you talk about getting your values from the system, everybody says you're a reactionary or you're an extremist. And I always just used to say, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but hopefully falling on good ears when someone would, when Adolf Hitler walked into a ballroom, people stood up and applauded. There were bankers in there, there were educators in there were doctors in there. The people that performed experiments on the Jewish prisoners were all graduates of medical school. So don't tell me this can't happen. Don't tell me this phenomena can't be repeated and that it can be very dangerous.
And then, and that makes it even scarier.
Yeah.
When the intellectual people start to fall for it and you get caught up in it, where do we go from here? But you and I talked earlier too about gun control.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I forget which Japanese leader it was at the time, said when they invaded Pearl Harbor, that they awakened the sleeping giant.
Right.
And part of the reason why we never got invaded was because everybody had a gun. They did not want to invade a country where everybody owned a gun.
There'd be a gun behind every tree.
And
Yeah.
they couldn't handle that.
Right.
So I'm not saying we need to have, and we make jokes about it. I mean, I can lay a gun on the table. It's not going to kill anybody till I pick it up.
Right.
So the gun's not the problem.
We've got killers.
We have killers with guns.
Right.
And all the laws in the world that we create to control guns, the illegal gun owners don't care. And the criminals don't care about the laws because otherwise they wouldn't buy. I can't own a gun because I'm a criminal. They're going to steal one or buy one on the black market.
They'll find some element.
Yeah.
You know, the most people that have been killed in our lifetime in a single instance were Pearl Harbor. That was with planes, you know, and ironically planes again in 9/11. So it's a hard heart that kills, you know, as they said in Full Metal Jacket. It's not a gun that kills, it's a hard heart.
Well, we're in that whole philosophy now of trying to put it in perspective, and I don't think we're doing a very good job of it.
No.
And it's not being explained to people, and all the violence today has been promoted, so guns become the issue. When guns aren't the issue, It's the education that's the issue. And it's part of what we talk about in parenting the child. But we go back to the very beginning, what you and I talked about, we have on several other shows. It starts somewhere. And I'm starting to write another book on that kind of just stuff, on parenting, getting involved with raising the child on a larger basis.
And what are the values of those parents?
Yeah.
Are they reflective of society or something else? You know, the decline in church attendance. You know, we saw that in our generation.
Yeah.
It was, that was one of the archaic, old world systems that our parents believed in, and it doesn't, you know, it's not germane anymore. Well, where do you get your value system from then? Society, popular culture, the government? Again, there's dangers in that. And I had a very powerful conversation with a Shirt Tail family member by marriage a few years back, and he basically said, you know, come on, Dick, you got to be enlightened. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm one of these knuckle dragging cave dwellers that believe in these things. But I said, Mike, just ask me one thing, and coincidentally, his name was Mike. I said, all you great social scientists and anthropologists and all you enlightened people, just tell me, what does history tell us? Don't argue with me personally. What does history tell us that's happened to every culture and civilization that has liberalized morality? They're gone. It doesn't work, because then go through a period where the most powerful reign because nobody believes in anything.
Yep.
And then after a long period of time, somebody gets tired of that, and there's another revolution where people get back to, you know, we can't be doing this. You know, we can't live this way.
And how do we bridge the gap between the new generation, the up-and-coming voting generation?
Which we're going to see in another election cycle.
Yeah.
Those same phenomena are going to take place. The same marketing tools are going to be used.
And what happens when whoever gets elected proves to be right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden the populace that were anti say, well, now what do I complain about now? How do I do that? How do I complain about something that's working for me? And I don't know why it's coming to my head right now, but I'm thinking about the lottery system that we have. In America, when you win the lottery, you pay taxes. It's the only country in the world that does that.
It's a reduction in your winnings is what it is.
All the countries overseas, and I've been in the lottery systems in
Sure.
different worlds, the tax is already paid on that when I buy the ticket. I've already earned that money and paid taxes on it.
Good point. Sales.
So I'm paying double taxes on the same money.
Sure.
When you win a lottery overseas, you win the share without taxes. Here we have to pay taxes on it again. Why?
Well, and it goes back, we got about a minute and a half. It goes back to when we talk about a free people. I don't think we have enough discussion about what free means.
Oh, good point.
It means free from persecution. It means free from criminals. It means free from you know, being under the thumb of the government or the local gang or whatever, you know. That was the idea by having arms and the Second Amendment and that type of thing. We were supposed to be sort of a arrogant, independent, free people, and the government just takes care of that other business that we can't when we're away. We now are a people under the government again, the very thing our founding fathers tried to stop. And again, this election cycle is going to be that same test, the same marketing strategies, the same reaction groups, the same impact studies, the same, and somebody's got to stop and say, if you want to fundamentally change this country, let's fundamentally go back to what was intended, not what I'm going to do personally for you. Don't rely on me. If I were elected president, I'll tell you right up front, I'm not going to run your life. That is not why I'm doing it. I do not want charge of your life. A little different ballgame. About 30 seconds.
Well, we may end up doing the show again.
Well, that's fine. We'll do
Because
a
I
second
think we need to. We're only hitting the top of this thing, and like an iceberg, it's all underwater. So we've got to keep going on this. Thank you very much for tonight. I've enjoyed this.
We'll do this through the election cycle.
We'll do this every couple weeks
All right.
from now on. Thank you.
You bet, Mike.
Have a good night.
You too.